Welcome in, guys, to another episode of the Hawk's Eye podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Coutts, and today we're fortunate enough to be joined by Rob Staton of the Seahawks Draft Blog. Me and Rob are going to dive into everything from this 53-man roster as it currently sets. What is he looking for in the Week 1 matchup versus the 49ers? What were some of his preseason takeaways and camp battles that he thought, either stood out or didn't really stand out at all in some respects? And we're going to touch on a bunch of other different topics in today's show. So before we get into that, guys, make sure you subscribe, like the channel, click that notification button so that way you never miss an episode. There's going to be a lot of content coming out every week, so I want to make sure you guys don't miss out on that. We'll have a couple more guests on this week to preview and get you guys ready for that Week 1 matchup versus San Francisco 49ers, but it all starts next with Rob Staton. All right, guys, welcome back in, and I am pleased to be joined by Rob Staton of Seahawks Draft Blog. Rob's a draft expert, does a great job covering the drafts, come on numerous times with me before when I was on the Hawks Zone Rundown. And Rob, it's great to have you back over here on the Hawks Eye. And how you been?
Yeah, really good. Looking forward to being in Seattle next week. Can't wait for that. I need a break from the day job, so I'm very much looking forward to going to Seattle and watching the opening game, and also watching some college football, sort of getting into that again, and seeing some of these players. And I have to say, the opening weekend I've found quite frustrating to watch so far, but I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, we will, Rob. So why don't we actually start there, Rob? I know, you have already probably started diving into the 2026 draft a little bit here and really getting a foothold on it. So let's actually get some early 2026 draft talk going. So obviously today, it's Saturday, there's college football games going on. We saw Arch Manning kind of have a bit of a hiccup there, it looked like in Ohio State. And what are your early impressions of Arch Manning, maybe this quarterback class, and some guys that you may think are potentially over or underrated coming forward into this draft?
Yeah, so I mean, on Arch Manning, I don't think we saw anything last season. I know there was all the talk because Quinn Ewers struggled, and there was all the talk that Arch Manning should play instead, and I just didn't see anything from Arch Manning that was that special in those games when he was a fill-in last year. As a runner, he's big, he's tall, he's athletic, and he's got that string to his bow that Ewers never had. But as a passer, you saw very little. So I had a lot of skepticism coming into this year that he was as good as some people were suggesting. I thought it was absolutely preposterous that people were saying that he was the top prospect in the draft. I mean, that is just it's just not true. The best player who's eligible for next year's draft is Caleb Downs, the Ohio State safety. Jeremiah Love, who's Julian Love's brother, the running back at Notre Dame, is an excellent prospect. Spencer Fano, the right tackle at Utah, is excellent. These are the players who should be at the top of the list, not Arch Manning. I mean, he's barely played. And really what we should have all been saying is Arch Manning's at the start of his college career, and one day in the future, with the Manning bloodlines, maybe he will turn into something. This idea that he was going to be the first overall pick in 2026 is just ridiculous. And then we see him today, and it just wasn't good. He looked like a deer in headlights. He looked like a player who's barely played a meaningful down in college football. When he was playing last year, he wasn't playing he wasn't playing on the road against Ohio State. And he just looks like somebody who needs time, as every quarterback does. So I thought that was it's been frustrating to see the media. I know why they do it. You've got a whole bunch of fan bases out there that are thinking they've got no hope. How do we, if you're the Cleveland Browns media, how do you generate a bit of excitement after the preseason you've had? You talk about the number 1 overall pick. If you're the Cowboys right now, maybe Jerry's positioning himself for a run at Arch Manning. All this kind of stuff, and all of the draft media journalists who are out there, reporters and these lot, they're all putting Arch Manning at the top of the mock drafts, all put him at the top of the list because I think they want they see it's a click thing. It's about people expect to see Arch Manning there. In reality, he is a million miles away from even being a a day 2 pick at this point, let alone a first round pick. But that's where we are. There's a whole bunch of overrated players already. I can talk about a few of them if you want. I think the legit players that are going into this year are pretty obvious to me. But if you want to spend a couple of minutes on that before we get into the main Seahawks stuff, I'm happy to.
Yeah, let's go over some of the guys you think that are overrated going into the draft process right now, Rob, that have stuck out to you already. And it's quite early in it, so if they're already sticking out, that's never a great sign.
Well, do you know what? I'll start with the players that I think are legit, and then I'll go on to the overrated ones. So I mentioned Downs, Love, and Fano. I think the 2 defensive linemen at Clemson are first-round picks. If they, stay healthy and continue to play the way they're going to, that's Peter Woods, the defensive tackle who can just play anywhere, and TJ Parker. I don't know if anybody saw a bit of the Auburn game last night against Baylor. Kedrick Folk had a sack, and he is enormous. He can rush off the edge like a player who's 30 pounds lighter than he is. That was a great start for him. I think the tackle at Miami, Magoa, I'm murdering his name. He's the right tackle. I think he is a legit player. And then from the quarterbacks, I think Garrett Nussmeier is clearly the best quarterback going into the year. Now, he has to play well. He has to do the things that he did well last year again, and he has to cut out the WTF mistakes that he did last season. If he can do that, then there's a good chance he'll be the top quarterback taken. Obviously, there's some others that could emerge. People like Sellers at South Carolina. I think it's too early to judge him. I think Drew Allar is a better. I think people have kind of just suddenly decided in the last month that it's the trendy thing to say Allar's no good. But I think there is some talent there and some intrigue. And I think Sawyer Robertson, who played for Baylor last year, has got something about him. And we saw a little bit of that in a tough game against Auburn. So, they're the players that, for me, I would highlight. Overrated players, we've already seen it. Look, Arch Manning is definitely an overrated player at this point, but yeah, there are certainly some other ones. So if people are watching this Alabama game that's going on now, you've got a defensive end called LT Overton. I don't understand why he's been talked about as a first-round pick. But other Alabama players, Jaden Roberts isn't playing in this game. He's in concussion protocol. I think he got cleared for the game, but he's not playing. Overrated. Dante Lawson, the linebacker for Alabama, overrated. People are talking about Carson Beck in a positive sense, a very overrated quarterback for me. Had a horrendous last year. Caden Proctor, the Alabama left tackle, he's got easily beat in this game a couple of times already in the first half. Like, I'm not seeing it. I think he's too big. I just think he's too big. I think you need to be a little bit lighter as a left tackle, but I still retain some natural core strength. I think he's too big. So I have to be honest. I'm not sure what some people are seeing, but my early draft board, I've kind of put a little bit of it together here. I think you've got, say, Nussmeier, Love, Fano, Magoa, Parker, Folk, Woods, and Downs are the players that I've got that potential first round grades on. And then some of the others, I think Jennings Dunker at Iowa, Caleb Lobu's the other tackle at Utah, has got something about it. Xavier Chaplin. These are players that are quite interesting. Logan Jones, the center at Iowa, I think is very interesting. Eli Stowers, the tight end at Vanderbilt. Nicholas Singleton's a very good player, the running back at Penn State. He's going to be in a two-headed monster there, but he is a player who could go legit top 50. I think it's a decent looking class already for the trenches, for O-line, D-line, which might be a good thing for Seattle if they want to continue to build there. I think there's a lot of red herrings out there already.
So, Rob, I'll just ask you this before we kind of move off the draft topics, but what would you say if you had to give your top 3 positional needs for Seattle going into this draft? Do they match up well, and what are those?
I think that's a lot to be determined. So Seattle's biggest need, were if Sam Darnold doesn't work out, it's probably going to be quarterback, because I think they've pretty much got a lot of the other things that they need now. So it's whether Darnold can show that he's the guy, and if he can't, you've got to say quarterback will be up there. I think receiver potentially could be a need, but then how's Torrey Horton going to get on? How's Cooper Kupp going to play this year? If you get through the season and both those guys played very well, you might think it's okay for another year. Cooper Kupp's obviously getting up in age, so I think receiver generally is a decent need. Now, there are some quarterbacks that I like. Like I think Haynes King's got something about him. I'm interested to see how John Mateer plays for Oklahoma. I'm not as big on Cade Klubnik as some others, but he's a player who's got a lot of experience and a lot of production. Fernando Mendoza is going to go to Indiana, so there's some quarterbacks there. Receiver, I'm not crazy about this receiver class. Jordan Tyson's probably the best with Evan Stewart that I've seen. I think some of these other guys, the Williams at Clemson, Tate at Ohio State, Bernard at Alabama, I think are a little bit overrated. And then what's the other biggest needs, I suppose, is if Abe Lucas gets hurt again, right tackle, and it's a really good looking right tackle. Fano, Magoa, Dunker, these are players that are very, very good who can play right tackle. Do you have a solution at center this year with the two guys you've got? Can they nail that down? If not, you're looking at a Logan Jones, a Parker Brailsford. I like Josh Kreutz at Illinois. Edge rusher, are you going to have to look at that area if Nwosu and Lawrence don't have a big impact, with Maffei and Hall just continue to be sort of decent complementary players rather than a top edge rusher? I think the strengths are tackle and defensive tackle at the minute. Looking ahead, things can change, obviously, but that's where I'd put the strengths. But I think a lot of people probably say receiver right now looks like the biggest need, and I have to say from the receiver study that I've done, I've not been wowed.
All right, well, let's actually get into some Seahawks talk here, Rob, and let's talk about this 53-man roster. So obviously they made a couple changes since the initial roster came out. They added a few guys. What were your initial impressions when you saw that roster get released? Did you like it? Did you think they maybe let go of some guys they should have kept there? What were your overall impressions?
Yeah, I think I thought they'd keep Marquez Valdez-Scantling and let him sort of play himself off the team if that was going to happen. Because typically with these veterans, you don't want to guarantee their salaries. So you keep them on the roster if they're cheap, and if they're expensive, you cut them to make a saving. But because the saving was minimal, you're still going to eat a huge chunk of cash with Valdez-Scantling. I thought they'd keep him just for that, and they'd see how it goes, and maybe one of Cody White and Derek Young would come back on the practice squad. They've obviously made a decision that he's just not shown enough during camp, whereas White had that very impressive game against the Packers. Derek Young played well against the Kansas City Chiefs. Torrey Horton has obviously played very, very well, Jake Bobo. So they've decided they're going to go with the younger guys. I'm not as worried about this group as some others because the system has generally kind of, you can fit guys in at receiver. So I'm comfortable with what they've got. I think they have got a top 20 pick at receiver with Jackson Smith and Jigba. That, I feel like I keep having to remind myself and others of that he was a very high draft pick. So, how many of them do you need? So I think that was kind of the one that I expected wouldn't happen that did. Apart from that, the only other surprises really were that, Nick Callerup got on there. And it's not that I didn't think he was going to get there per se. I knew very little about him. I've not been watching training camp. I'm not in Seattle. I can't nip down and go and watch him play. And I have to say, I didn't pour through the all-22 for the preseason games to see how his blocking was. So, when he makes it, to me, it's just encouraging. You just think they obviously think he can be like Eric Sorbert of the future, and that he probably would have got snapped up by somebody else if maybe even the Niners, if they'd let him go. So that they're protecting him a little bit. And when they're protecting an undrafted free agent, I quite like that because it means that they really like him. So it's encouraging. And then the other one was Jared Ivey. Like, for me, Ivey flashed a lot. He flashed a lot in preseason. And this is a player who, I think throughout the college football season last year, it felt like he was a solid kind of third round type. And then he didn't test well. There were a few sort of character things, like attitude things. And going undrafted just seems to have lit a fire under his arse. Like, he come out flying in these games. And you just wonder a little bit whether he's got the bit between his teeth and whether he could actually be a bit of a diamond for Seattle moving forward. So I'm glad they protected him as well, because it felt like he had a really good preseason. Apart from that, I think it was kind of what you'd expect. They look too light at linebacker. I'm a bit surprised they haven't done more in the off season. So that's draft, free agency, and now to add more at linebacker, whether that's a trade or something. It just seems that is worrying to me. That inside linebacker position is a little bit worrying because it's thin with depth. and they've had injuries there. And then I think everything else kind of makes pretty much perfect sense. And I'm encouraged. I think it's a good looking roster.
The other name I was going to say for me that kind of stuck out was a guy that I was excited about when they got him as a UDFA, and that was Connor O'Toole making this roster as a outside linebacker along with Jared Ivey. When I look at this team, they have done a couple things. They obviously had a Chris Paul Jr., a linebacker out of Ole Miss. They kind of stole him away from the Rams after the Rams released him, and he wasn't able to get back on the practice squad. And then there was that other linebacker out of, I want to say, San Francisco. I think it's, Surratt that they brought in. So they've added to that room. But I think the thing for me, Rob, along with you, is I'm surprised they didn't add more veteran established presence to that room in that inside linebacker group behind Ernest Jones and Tyrese Donet, because all they've got is Drake Thomas. Obviously, Patrick O'Connell got put back through to the practice squad. For me, I was surprised a little bit with the offensive line. I wasn't sure that they weren't going to make a move at some point. Now they still could, and we'll maybe jump into that a little bit later. But the fact they've got two rookies essentially backing up Bradford and another rookie in Zabel with Cable Dew and Richmond was a little bit of an interesting tactic for me, at least, with this, considering how important that group is going into this season.
Well, Mike McDonald said something very interesting when he spoke on, I think it was Friday. And I think it might have been Brian who asked about sort of what happens, who's the primary backup if one of the guards goes down. And I think Mike McDonald said, you'll see things kind of shuffled around a bit here. And my takeaway from that was they'll move Sundell to guard and they'll play Olu. So actually the plan B, if a guard gets injured, is probably the center moves to guard and the other center comes in, because they probably think our strength is at center, not in the depth at guard. And I agree. There's a reason why Dalton Risner was on the radar. They clearly wanted somebody who could be a bit more experienced there. And sadly for the Seahawks and for everybody else, there just isn't that sort of quality depth at guard, and players like Brandon Scherf are retired and, they're not signing with anybody. So you don't really have many options here to get a good veteran backup in. And Risner's probably gone to the Bengals to play, not to sit behind Anthony Bradford. So it's tough. We have to keep our fingers crossed there's not going to be any injuries there. It does not look like a strong depth behind the guards. The hope has to be that they do stay healthy, because if they can, it looked really promising against the Chiefs. They look really good. So we'll see how they get on against the Niners.
Yeah, the only guy I can really think of for me, if they were to bring in a veteran, would maybe be Shane Lemieux, who played for Benton down in New Orleans. I believe he got cut by the Saints. He's the only one outside of Reisner where I go, hey, maybe you bring him in. He's familiar with this system. He played in it last year. You can bring that veteran depth, because if plan B is really what you say it is, and you think it is Sundell bumps, I kind of think, okay, that's great, but are we actually getting a little bit worse at center? Not that Olu's bad or anything, but Sundell really, I think, showed how well he can play in this scheme with what Clint Kubiak wants to do. So we'll move over to this, though. Rob, what were some of your biggest preseason takeaways from this team that, maybe when going into it, you wanted to see them do this, and this to prove to you that they could be something? Or were there things, on another sense where you were kind of just shocked that they were able to actually show you those type of things in the preseason?
Well, I think number one was watching them run the ball against the Chiefs and seeing that kind of glimpse as to what they want to be, the ideal. Seeing the offensive line block the way they did. I thought Sundell's performance in that game was about as good a sense performance as I've seen in the last 12 months. And that's from watching the Drew Dolmans and, all the draft prospects from last year and things like that, to try and get a feeling for what they might do there. That was a terrific performance from him. So that was really impressive. Abe Lucas looking back to his best in that game as well. I thought that was a sensational performance from Abe Lucas. Zach Charbonnet running as he does. I'm convinced that they favor Charbonnet over Walker. And look, that's not to mean that they don't like Walker or they think he's crap. It's more a case of they think that Charbonnet can get them where they need to go. He's going to be the more consistent player. He's tough. He's physical. He is explosive. People keep saying he's not as explosive as Ken Walker. His vertical jump was better than Ken Walker's. It's just that Ken Walker's a lightning fast player for huge size. and can make magic happen, as we've seen. When it happens, it's incredible. But Charbonnet's more that, you know what you're going to get. He's going to do what you need. So I think seeing that whole run game stuff and the offense building the way it did was great. So that was my main takeaway from that. Toy Horton's emergence, someone I really liked going into the draft, had a day 2 grade on him, to see him performing as well, to see Nick Imamori saying that he's going to be the steal of the draft. I thought that was very, very good. I have to say, when people have criticized me for this, because as soon as you start sort of saying anything negative about anybody, you're clearly an idiot. But I was a bit disappointed, I have to say, with Jalen Milroe's performance against the Packers. I know that it was tough for him at the start when he was playing against the Green Bay starters, and the line didn't do enough, and it wasn't Kubiak calling the game, it was the quarterback coach. But I expected more from him as an athlete. When he got into space and scrambled, I was thinking this is where he's going to be an X factor. Like, this is where you're going to see some of that Lamar stuff where you just can't stop him. And he just looked tentative. He looked unspectacular as a scrambler, and when he was on the run. And when he was in the pocket, he actually looked more comfortable. Now, some people might go, well, that's a good thing, because what we actually want him to do is convert a 3rd and 10 from the pocket. I agree with that. Like, there were some good throws there. But I think overall, I just thought I expected to see much more of a dynamic athlete when he got into space that would have really sort of, and now I'm starting to wonder, well, do you really want to use him in these Milroe packages during the season that people are talking about? And also, when he was sort of running the ball in those short yardage situations, he fumbled it twice and he botched a snap. So I kind of came away from thinking it would have been great for that Green Bay game for him to play well, so that you think, okay, like, this is seriously exciting. Like, not for this year, but for next year. Let's get back to training camp next year and see if he can take another step forward there. And in the end, I kind of came away from it thinking, okay, definitely not writing him off. Definitely not saying he's got no future or that he's definitely not going to be the starter. But I think you just pump the brakes a little bit. And it reminded me that the Seahawks are in a place now where there's a question mark next to the quarterback position. How good is Darnold? How good is Milroe? Do you need to draft someone potentially next year if this doesn't go according to plan? You have to keep your options open there.
Yeah, all the stuff you touched on, Robert, are definitely things for me. And the Milroe thing for me kind of stood out in the Green Bay game, because we saw, some real bright spots in those first 2 games, and then you hit that Green Bay game. And again, I give them the same thing in that first quarter, 2.5, when the Green Bay starters were out there versus that line that most of them didn't even make practice squad potentially. But the thing, I think, to your point, like, he was kind of unspectacular when it came to running the ball. Like, he just didn't look like the guy we had seen at Alabama, where it's like, oh, he gets that edge and good luck catching him. Like, he's gone for 30 yards or so. And I wonder if that's partly them not really enforcing that in him. And to your point of him being tentative from a coaching staff, being like, hey, we want to see you. How do you operate? Mike McDonald said that, we want to see how his operational progress grows. Is that weighing too much in his head that I have to be this and show growth here and get away from what's made me what I kind of am at this point? I will say his passing and his decision making, I think you saw improvement through what we saw at the end of his tenure at Alabama. I think, though, like, to your point, I think it is time to slow the brakes down on, hey, like, we got to move off Sam Darnold as quickly as possible. Like, people that were trying to drum up hey, is this a Matt Flynn, Russell Wilson situation again? It's like, well, when Russ came out, he set the record for completion percentage in NCAA history coming out of Wisconsin, took a team to the Rose Bowl, played against that high-powered Oregon team at the time, and he was running a pro-style offense. Improved. There's no comparison between Jalen and Russell except for maybe the escapability factor. But when Russ used to escape, he'd always be looking for a play down the field where Jalen escapes and takes off. So I never go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say, that's the thing, though, isn't it? He doesn't look like an escape artist to me. He looks like an athlete, whereas Russ was he's in trouble and he's somehow got away. Like, Jalen Milroe is kind of like, he's not very elusive. He's actually just fast.
Yeah, once I'm out, I'm gone, and that's it. Like, I'm leaving and I'm taking off. Where, to your point with Russ, it was like watching Fran Tarkington in that back in the day, where it's like, oh, I'm back here still, but I'm not really here. And you think you're getting close, and then I step one way, and then I throw the ball 30 yards down the field to an open Doug Baldwin. Those are kind of the things that, Russ made look easy. And I think the projection of, oh, because we took Jalen in the third, which I think started it, he's this athlete, he's got a big arm. Well, Sam had his good year. Well, Matt Flynn only had really one good game, and they gave him that deal. And you got more of an established college quarterback with Russell than you did, I think, with Jalen. So I think I'm in agreement with you. You got to pump the brakes, let him develop. I have been saying for a long time, I'm looking at 2027 for really to see if Jalen can take this job. And I think you're right. There is a question mark there. I think Sam's going to do quite well in this system, even from what we saw in that first drive. But it's still, you have to see it for 4 quarters and sustain through a season. So it'll be interesting for me with Sam when there's those games where maybe the run game isn't as successful and there's a little bit put more on his plate to win the game with some big throws at crucial times. Is he able to deliver in those? And that I think will be the test of time for this team this season. But speaking of that, they have a big game, Rob. It's the 49ers. You're going to be at the game. You're going to be there and enjoy the warm weather that's currently hit the Pacific Northwest. It's quite hot here right now, so remember to bring your shorts and T-shirts and all that good stuff. But yeah, so Rob, what are you looking for in this matchup, and how crucial do you think this matchup is for the entirety of the Seahawks season?
Well, I think it's a very important game. I think if you lose, like you've had a big reset, you had a bad home record last year. I think if you lose your opening game at home to an NFC West opponent, it's a setback. Now it's one game. It doesn't mean the season's going to be over, but if they lose, I know as I'm sort of leaving Lumen Field, I'm going to be wondering, are they ever going to get the home field advantage back? Are they ever going to be sort of going to get to this point where they can make teams fear coming here again? And I also think they're getting the Niners at a decent time because they're quite banged up at receiver. They've got a young defense that might be a bit more settled in a few weeks' time. I know it's on the other hand to that, you could argue, well, Christian McCaffrey may well be hurt in a few weeks and you're getting him fresh and ready to go and all of that. But I just think it's vital that they start off with a win. And it doesn't have to be a spectacular performance because it very rarely is. Like even in the sort of the peak Russ years, there were often, remember that Miami game where he was hobbled and he just about won. And there was a game, I think, against the Bengals where they just about won on the opening day. I think it was the Bengals. Like there was all sorts of games like that where they just scraped through against teams they were expected to beat. So they don't have to smash the Niners or anything. I just think you need to win. And that will send a message itself, that the Seahawks are, they mean business. I keep seeing like the Niners are favored in this division. I don't really understand that. I think the Seahawks keep getting. I had a bet on the Seahawks to win the division, and they were the 4th favorites in the NFC West. So I think it is important for that. I think we need to see Sam Darnold playing well. I think I agree with you. I think the system will suit him, and I think he's got that within him. But his last 2 games, we all saw what they were. His last 2 games, the Vikings were not very good. So if he comes out in this game and plays like that, people are going to go, that's who he is. Like it's important that he has a good game, doesn't play within himself too much, doesn't look like a deer in the headlights either, like Arch Manning did today. He needs to go out there and play well and deliver. And we need to see some identity with that offense, with the running game, the offensive line playing well, the defense playing well. And if they can do that and get a win, I'll be having an old fashioned in the hotel that night and feeling very good about life because that's kind of what we want to see. But it is big, and if they lose to the Niners again at home, especially if the Niners play the way that they have when they've beaten Seattle at home in recent years, that'll be a tough one to take. It'll sort of make people question a few things, and I also get the sense that there are people ready and waiting to go. You shouldn't have got rid of Geno Smith. You shouldn't have got rid of Pete Carroll and all this stuff. Those people are still out there. And I think a bad start and those voices will be coming out of the closet.
Now, I got a flip question for you on this in a hypothetical. Say Seattle comes out and completely lambastes the 49ers and it's not even close. Do you think it almost does the opposite effect for some of these fans where it'll set the expectations for this team too high going for the rest of the season too?
Yes, potentially, because as much as I was mentioning, we've seen the Seahawks sort of like get some scruffy wins, as we might say over here, like in the opening weekend. We've also seen them play well in the opening weekend and then lose like the following week later. So they played the Colts and it was Shane Waldron's first game. Everyone's like, look at this amazing offense. This is the future. And then I think the following week they ran all over by Derrick Henry and the Titans. And you just thought, well, what was that? Like all of the energy, and the offense didn't look as good. So all of the energy from the previous week just disappeared within the space of 7 days. So I think, yes, I think the job of yourself and me and all of the radio people and the other YouTubers, if Seattle give them a good old arse kicking next week, will be to sort of say, okay, let's enjoy it, celebrate this one, but let's just remember they've got to go to Pittsburgh the following week. And that's not going to be an easy place to go for their. I'm guessing it's their home opener, so it's going to be difficult. You know, Aaron Rodgers equally is going to want to have a good start. DK Metcalf's going to be up for it. You know, TJ Watt's not going to have had his sort of little knocks and injuries by then, so that's a tough game, and you could easily go there and lose and look not great doing it. So yes, I think perspective will be important, whatever happens at the end of this game, but. I just want to see a win. You know, I don't know what it's like over there. I don't know how much exposure you guys have to San Francisco 49ers fans in where you are. But over here, the San Francisco 49ers fans in England are very annoying. So I want to win that game. I really want to beat the Niners. They are just a chirpy bunch of MFers. And I really want to beat the Niners and see it. Because my last visit to Seattle was that Thanksgiving game when they got destroyed by him. So I want to go to Seattle and see a handsome win and have that very expensive old-fashioned in the hotel I'm staying in.
Well, that does sound like a very good plan after that game, Rob. But yeah, I know the San Francisco fans still think they run this division. They still think that they own the Seahawks, even after the win last year in Santa Clara. But I'm in agreement. I do think this team can beat this Niners team, and considering how the Niners are currently constructed, they look like they're in their own reset kind of here with all the injuries and players they let go in free agency. Like, this is the opportunity where you kind of get your foot on their throat and you stomp them out and end it. And that's where I think Seattle's at with this, because the rest of this division, and that's something we'll kind of touch on right now. You know, you look at the rest of this division in the NFC West, the Rams, we're waiting to find out if Matthew Stafford's going to need a wheelchair at any point in the next couple of weeks, I think, you know, with what's going on with his back and everything. Eventually they'll get him out there on one of those supercharged ones, so he at least has an ability to get out of the way of things. But the Cardinals are who they generally tend to be. Like, they're an interesting team this year, but Kyler Murray's still at quarterback. I still think they have some operational issues within that offense and the structure of it. This division seems very prime for the taking for Seattle as a team that's now ascending. They've got this very well-established defense with probably the best defensive, let's not even say probably the best defensive mind right now in football, and Mike McDonald. And it looks like you've paired the right type of offensive philosophy with it. Do you think this division is at the point now where Seattle really can be a true player in it, or are they still waiting to get there?
Yes, I think that they can. I think it's now is the time to take a step, and I think it is about taking a step. I don't think it's about taking a jump. You know, I don't think you're going to go from, well, we've not made the playoffs for the last 2 years to, oh, look, we're in the NFC Championship game. I just don't think that's. I don't think it's impossible, by the way, because I think the NFC is wide open, but I don't think it's something that we should expect. But I think winning the NFC West, getting a home playoff game, and that would give you a chance. I know, you know, touch wood, the home form is better, and that would give you a chance to win a home playoff game, progress to the divisional round, and feel like, okay, we can have a bit of excitement in January again. That would be a step forward, and I think that is there for us to see. Like, I feel like the Cardinals have become that team that every year everyone's going, they're the ones that they're going to make a step this year. And I'm looking at the defense. I just do not see enough difference makers on that defense. I think Kyler Murray's okay. He's a decent player, but he's also not somebody who's like, I don't think he's obsessed about being great. I think he's naturally gifted and talented, obviously. Great arm, elusiveness, escapability, can beat you on his day. I don't know if he's, what was the term they used? Pissed off for greatness back in the day. I don't know if he is. And he's got some weapons to throw to. Trey McBride's one of the best in the business. You know, Marvin Harrison, everyone expected was going to be like his dad. He wasn't as a rookie. We'll see what he's like in year 2. You know, they don't have an amazing offensive line. So I'm not sure they'll be any better than they were last year. I'm surprised by the number of Cardinals fans who were actually online. I always kind of got the feeling there weren't any, but they keep sort of chirping in. They'll probably chirp in the comments of this video and say, what you're talking about? We're obviously going to win the NFC West. But so you've got them. The Niners, for me, feel like the 2017 Seahawks. They've got enough talent to think, come on, the season's beginning. Let's have a run here. Could this happen? Could this happen? That was where we all were in 2017. And in the end, you kind of just got to the end of that year and thought, yeah, the end of an era. And really, thinking back now, it probably should have been Carroll's swan song. Maybe you could have justified that first reset. But maybe that's where the Niners are getting with Kyle. Maybe Kyle needs a break. He looks absolutely miserable. He may need a year off to just reset and then go somewhere else and be a Super Bowl winning head coach, which I think he will be one day. But I just wonder whether they've gone past their window of opportunity. And really, it's surprising how many people see them as a legit contender. Sheil Kapadia did this list of series contender, tier listing, and he had the Niners as a legit contender. And I was thinking, well, what's the basis for that? It doesn't feel that way to me. Maybe I'm wrong. And then you've got the Rams, and the Rams, like you say, Matt Stafford's back. The health of the left tackle. I know everyone's kind of like, Cooper Kupp was no good anymore, but he's not there. Now it's all on Puka Nacua. And I thought Jared Verse played very, very well last year, but there's a bit of pressure on him now. He needs to be like the defense with Braden Fisk. And I just wonder if we'll get 6 games in and Jared Verse will be having a perfectly acceptable sophomore season in the NFL. But people will be going, well, he's not Aaron Donald. Because they kind of he's kind of set huge expectations now. So I'm not sure about the Rams. People keep forgetting the Rams had the same record as Seattle last year. The same record. And they played Minnesota, who collapsed, and Darnold collapsed. And then they played the Eagles hard, but still lost. And everyone's acting like, well, no, but they're a contender now. McVay's a genius. Stafford, if he's healthy, can play well. He didn't play well in the regular season. I'm just not sure they're as good as some people think. And then you've got the Seahawks, and I think now is the time. You've built a decently young roster. It's not as good as some of the others in the NFC, but it's maybe an off season away from being there.
Yeah, and for me, I made a bold prediction, Rob. You'll probably laugh at it, but I said that this team could, in a bold prediction, win 2 playoff games because of how wide open this NFC is. If they get in, they get a home playoff game, and they get rolling. And, initially when the schedule came out, a lot of people were like, oh, could be a very daunting schedule. I don't think it's as daunting as I initially thought with Seattle, where I went, some of these teams aren't the teams. Like the Niners aren't the team they were, and the Rams are really hinging on Matthew Stafford's spine. If it can hold up for an 18-game season, because at any point, if he is out for a stretch of time, it's Jimmy Garoppolo or Stetson Bennett taking snaps for that team. And we saw last year with a defense that basically in a meaningless game still was able to dominate to a point. They did get, with Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, that offense got rolling to a bit and we won that game. But like you said, it took to the 5th tiebreaker for us to get knocked out of the playoffs and the division title. I just look at it and I go, I don't see a reason why it can't be Seattle's year to finally take that step and get this division back from the Rams and the 49ers. And I'd never trust the Cardinals, even when they had Bruce Arians and Carson Palmer there and they had their one good year there in 2015. It was still yeah, but it's the Cardinals. Are they really going to be able to sustain this? And they never seem like the team that can sustain when they do take a step in the right direction. They take 4 steps back, it seems, in the opposite. It'll be an interesting division. I think it's going to definitely be one that's constantly in flux throughout the year, where I think you'll see very little separation till maybe the later point of the year. So it'll be interesting for sure. So let's go into this. What is your win-loss projection? We'll wrap up with this. What is your win-loss projection, Rob, for the Seattle Seahawks?
Well, I'm going for a 12-win season. This is if anybody thinks I'm just being a homer, I would encourage you to go and have a look at any of the videos or articles that I wrote from 2021 to 2024. Because this is, I am not someone who just gets carried away, thinks everything the Seahawks do is amazing, thinks they're going to win the NFC West every year. That's definitely not where I am. But I had a look at that schedule, and I do think 12 wins is viable. I think there are some tough games, obviously, but not enough of them to sort of think. Obviously, injuries will change things as the season goes on. So I think a 12-win season, winning the NFC West. Then we wait to see which wild card team they would get. I think it's as you quite rightly say, there are not many teams to be worried about in the NFC. We have to wait and see how the Eagles are going to handle being the champions. Some teams thrive on it, very few do. Others kind of have take a step back, don't they? They kind of get a bit fat and happy after winning the Super Bowl. It's quite easy to forget that a year ago the Eagles were not in a great place and came on strong at the end. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a Nick Sirianni coached team maybe does not handle the limelight that well. But then you look at other teams that I think that the Packers obviously have made a big move. So they owned the Seahawks in Seattle last year quite handily. So they would imagine that they would be a tough out. The Commanders might be tough opponents, especially have to play them in Washington. I think Tampa Bay are a bit like Seattle. That could be quite an even match. But if you had to go to Tampa Bay, that would be tough. In Seattle, I would probably fancy Seattle in that one. I don't think the Vikings are going to be as good this year. I think they caught lightning in a bottle last year. I don't think they're going to be up there. Lions, we have to wait and see. They've lost Ben Johnson. They've lost a few players, Frank Ragnow. So we have to see how good they're going to be. I don't know if I'm missing anybody else. Obviously the NFC West teams we've talked about. So there are obviously teams that if you had to play them, like I wouldn't want to go to Lambeau. Seattle's crap at Lambeau. I mean, they're even crap in the preseason at Lambeau. So like, if you ever have to go there, I'm chalking that down as an L. But some of those teams in Seattle, maybe even one or two of them on the road. The Rams, they've beaten the Eagles. I don't think the Eagles, it's the toughest place to maybe go in the playoffs, even if you ended up losing. I think you could keep it close. So I'm with you. I think they can win a playoff game, having won the 12, maybe 2, depending on who they would end up playing. But I'm optimistic. I'm going to be optimistic. I think Mike McDonald's a great coach. I think Clint Kubiak's the perfect offensive coordinator partner. I hope Sam Darnold's the guy. I'm feeling good. I'm going for a 12-win season.
Well, you're one less than me, Rob. I've been saying 13-4 is what I think, because I think they may sneak out one of those games like that Washington game potentially. That some people think, going across the East Coast could be tough in that Washington team. I wonder if that Washington team doesn't take a small step back just due to the age, not so much Jaden Daniels, but the rest of that roster's construction. So no, I'm with you there. I think the NFC West is well within their grasp. And I think, a 12-13 win season is not something that's to be scoffed at with this team currently as they're constructed. So, Rob, I want to thank you for your time, man. Get you out of here before we go too long here. But why don't you tell my listeners, Rob, what's going on at the Seahawks Draft Blog? What do you got coming up with any of your podcasts and stuff that you do there with Robbie? Any of that kind of stuff?
Okay, so SeahawksDraftBlog.com. I am going to write something about college football at some point this weekend, so that'll be up there on the blog. When the season starts, we'll be doing the usual streams on my YouTube channel. You can find that at Rob Staton Football, which is all one word. And then if I can plug what I'm going to be doing during the season, that'd be great. So on Tuesdays, I'm gonna be on Seattle Sports with Bump and Stacy every week. That's, I think, starting next week. That's going to be it's a new thing that I'm doing. I'm very much looking forward to that. I have the Seahawks Collective on a Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time with Brian and Annabelle and Michael Sean Dugar. So we do that every Tuesday. Wednesday is Puck Sports. So check that out. Puck does a great job. So go and subscribe to his channel on Puck Sports. So I think that's everything, and then all of my usual stuff that I do on the blog. So I'm glad the football's back. I just can't wait to get to Seattle. Although I think it's going to be weird that you're saying it's so warm out there, because I've only ever been to Seattle when it's been absolutely cocking freezing. So like to go there when it was beautiful weather. Like the 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, the weather was sublime. It was great to go and have a walk around Seattle, first thing in the morning. But this idea, I've been looking, it's like what we would say 30 degrees. It's, I don't know what that is in what you use, but that's pretty darn hot. So I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this. I think the sea breeze is going to cool you down.
Well, it says it's going to be 24 to 30 degrees on the Sunday that you're there, Rob, Celsius. So enjoy yourself. It'll be a lot of fun. But Yeah, you sound like you're going to be really busy this upcoming season. I know I'm going to be watching all your stuff, Rob, that you've got coming out. So for my listeners, make sure you guys go subscribe to Rob's YouTube channel. Check out the Seahawks Draft Blog. It's always great articles written by Rob there. And then Seahawks Collective and the Puck Show and 710. Make sure you check Rob's stuff out there, guys. Rob, again, appreciate you coming on, man. I'd love to have you back during the season at some point to chop it up again.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you like the new jersey or not before we finish?
Oh, the New Jersey. I actually don't mind it. I actually don't mind the New Jersey. It is kind of Oregon-esque duck for me, and I'm a Huskies fan, so it's a little hard, but I think my favorite part of the entire jersey is actually the helmet. I like how it changes color like that. It's done much better than when Jacksonville tried to do it years ago with that gold and black weird thing that they did. That was awful. But I don't know, Rob, what do you think of that New Jersey?
I like it. I've seen a picture of it, like the one that you can buy. So the jersey that fans will buy, not the ones that they wear, and it looks a lot different than it does on the players. So on the players, it does look like a college unit, and on the when it's actually wet, there's a lot more blue on it than I think people realize. So I actually quite like it. I think it's a bit different. So I'm not against it. And as you're a Husky fan, I wonder, Bryce, by the time we've published this, whether Kalen DeBoer is going to be in a job anymore, because I've just looked up at the Alabama score.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very excited to see how this Husky season goes, and that's a whole nother topic with Damon Williams and that whole group there, Jed Fishes. They might be in a better place now going forward than they would have if Kalen DeBoer had stayed. So it'll be interesting. But Rob, thank you again for your time, man, and we'll talk to you soon.
Anytime.
All right, guys, that was guest Rob Staton from the Seahawks Draft Blog on. That was an awesome interview with Rob and myself. Touched on a bunch of variety of topics, even got into some early 2026 draft talk, which I always love Rob's perspective on those things. He does such a great job studying the draft classes and really bringing some very detailed insight. So, guys, obviously that's it for today's episode, but make sure you guys, again, subscribe to the channel, click the notification button so you never miss an episode. Like it, share this channel with fellow Seahawk fans that you know and other people so we can start building that subscriber base. And guys, we'll have some more cool content coming out this week. An interview with Clinton Bonner from the Seahawkers podcast will be coming on. There'll be a show with me and Mookie breaking down kind of the Seahawks, and we call it the state of the Seahawks, where they're at currently, looking ahead to the 49ers game. And I'll even be doing a prediction show, guys. I will do a show based on my win-loss projection for the Seattle Seahawks. So a bunch of those shows will be coming out this week. So make sure, guys, you are clicked up for that notification. And appreciate you guys staying on for this one. And we'll see you on the next one. Go Hawks.